The brush. Faster, Bobby, faster. Then they lay, unable to move or comprehend. At last, Bobby moved away from Louise and rested next to her. Her gaze was a mix of satisfaction and admiration for him. You are so good, God, my love. Whenever I believe that things cannot get any better, they always do. Marty sneaked into the house, but Louise was already asleep. He stuck his head through the bedroom door, but he could tell she was asleep by the cadence of her breathing. Back in the kitchen, he strolled and took a seat at their dinner table. He questioned himself rhetorically, now what? Though he was aware that he ought to go to bed on his own, his work at the printing plant had left him too stimulated to sleep. He briefly considered waking Louise to try to gain some affection, but he quickly dismissed the notion. He'd wake her up and she'd get all grumpy. If I asked her for a quick one, she'd probably bite me, he believed. Damn, working the 4 to midnight shift is really screwing up my life. Bobby had proposed it a month ago, and it had seemed like such a fantastic idea. Marty had plans to make improvements to the house, but finances always appeared to be a problem, partly because Louise seemed to spend money like it was free. Bobby abruptly made the suggestion that Marty consider working the second shift, while he was complaining to his boss about the state of affairs at work. For you too, that shift disparity would be quite helpful. When Marty had brought it up, Louise had not objected, which was a pleasant surprise as it had seemed like a terrific idea. Marty felt quite smart because he had offered to make the change, and his first weekly income had increased as a result. He was now earning a substantial raise in compensation for working the same number of hours per week with only a small inconvenience. However, Marty was not prepared for how quickly the minor inconvenience may escalate into something more serious. First of all, he struggled to get used to his new sleep schedule. Marty had grown up with the habit of having several hours to unwind after work or school before retiring for the night. It was nearly hard for him to go straight to bed after work now that he was returning home after midnight. He was turning into a night owl soon. Additionally, Marty discovered that his time with his wife had significantly decreased due to the new schedule. She had long ago left for her job as an aide at the elderly center by the time he woke up on weekdays. As a result, weekends were their sole opportunity to spend time together. One important consequence was that his romantic life was severely disrupted by his new job schedule. Even worse, Louise's lack of activity during the week seemed to decrease her hunger when they did spend time together, rather than boosting her libido. Marty had to gently persuade her to have some fun between the covers on set nights. To make matters worse, Marty discovered that they weren't really saving much of the raise in salary he had made such a sacrifice for. Louise seemed to spend even more time shopping since she saw the money in their joint checking account as money that needed to be spent. Worse, Marty was reluctant to have a conversation about Louise's buying habits with her in person. He was expecting to strike it lucky on the weekend, which was the only other opportunity he had for a chat like this. Nothing kills the possibility of a passionate night like giving the wife a lecture about excessive spending. Marty had intended to utilize the additional funds to upgrade their older Victorian home with a spacious yard. The reason they were able to purchase the house was because the previous owner, a widow, had let it to deteriorate significantly. After stretching their finances to buy the ancient house, Marty and Louise devoted a large portion of their free time to refurbishing it. Though he was happy with his accomplishments, he had even more ambitious remodeling ambitions. Those dreams appeared farther distant than ever tonight as he sat in the darkened living room. I'm not sure how long I can continue like this. Before he could comfortably fall into bed beside his sleeping wife, he needed an hour to unwind. He woke up in the middle of the morning. He threw on some old clothes and went outside to mow the lawn after a hurried breakfast. It took him several hours and a lot of sweat to push the ancient mower around the acre lot in the Georgia heat, and he wished with all his heart that they had enough money to buy a riding mower. Marty stopped at the convenience shop near the facility that afternoon on his way to work to fill up his truck's tank. He saw the Georgia State Lottery sign as he waited to pay for the gas at the counter. Add in a couple of lottery tickets, Millie, he said to the elderly store owner. You just made the deadline. Honey, the drawing is tomorrow. I'm overdue for some good luck. She gave him the 2 tickets and his change while grinning at him and wishing him luck in the game. He placed them inside his wallet and set them aside. The shift that night was a bear. The large Heidelberg press typically operated on its own. However, Marty had to clean the rollers, install 4 new color plates, and then closely watch the print run until all 4 were in registration for each of the several brief press runs scheduled for the evening. The 5th color was needed for one assignment, which added significantly to the setup and registration time. Marty was worn out by the end of his shift, but he was again too excited to fall asleep when he arrived home. Slumping into his favorite recliner, he reached for the remote to switch on the TV but changed his mind. Rather, he sat in silence, drinking a beer can while reflecting on his life. Marty grew up as the family's 3rd child, following an elder brother and sister. He was the modest, down-to-earth child who excelled in school and was a voracious reader. Despite being on the outskirts of the popular crowd in high school, he still had friends, partly because of his popular older siblings. Despite lacking physical prowess, he offered his services as the basketball team's manager. He enjoyed the peace and quiet of hunting with his father during the summer months. But after he turned 16, such trips essentially came to an end. Marty's father's acquaintance made arrangements for him to work during the summer at the large printing facility in the town. That's why Marty hardened his lean frame, moving heavy pallets of paper throughout the expansive plant from the loading dock to the right machines. Maybe Louise Luttrell was drawn to him because of those physical changes. She used to date some of the football stars and was one of the beautiful girls in the popular crowd. However, there was something about Marty that drew her in, and during their senior year, they started dating and quickly established a committed relationship. After graduating, Marty intended to enroll in the nearby community college, but during his final year of study, his father, a carpenter, fell through a roof while working, leaving him permanently crippled. The family managed to make ends meet thanks to workers' compensation and his mother's job at the cheap store, but their youngest son was no longer able to attend college. Marty forced himself to look for work after swallowing his disappointment. Luckily, during his summers at the printing company, he had established a positive impression on the management, which helped him secure a position as an apprentice pressman. While Louise continued to attend community college, she and Marty remained steady. After she received her associate's degree, the two of them were married in a simple ceremony. At that point, Marty had saved enough cash for a down payment on the fixer-upper, and they moved into their own house as a married couple. Kids would hold off, they had decided, until they could secure a stable financial future. They'd had big goals, but over the course of the following few years, those dreams appeared to fade like a picture left in the sun, wiped away by the daily grind of life, the expenses they had to pay, and the housework they needed to perform. Marty asked himself, where did it all go, and more importantly, what can we do to get it back? Marty jolted out of his dream, crept back into the bedroom, undressed, and crawled beneath the covers. He found Louise beautiful even in her sleep, and he unconsciously hardened. He said to himself, I can't wait till this weekend, and closed his eyes. The following morning, Marty was surprised to see that it was almost 10 a.m. Louise had disappeared for work once more, leaving him undisturbed. He immediately cooked himself breakfast and then pulled out the tape and drywall compound, since he had planned to finish some drywall work in one of the rooms that they didn't use today. With Terry's help, he had already hung the large sheets. All he needed to do now was tape and mud the seams. It was 2:30 p.m. when he finished getting everything ready for sanding, so he put his tools away and got himself a sandwich. He made some dinner to bring to work after lunch and then got in the shower. It was time to leave for work by that point. Luckily, Marty's job that evening was rather routine, so by midnight, he wasn't very exhausted or anxious. Still, when he got home, he wasn't ready for bed, and in order to avoid waking Louise, he switched on the television softly. He had barely reclined in his chair when a commercial for the Georgia lottery aired. The winning numbers were read out on the screen beneath the attractive woman positioned in front of the $10 million symbol. With a sigh of relief, Marty dutifully took the tickets out of his wallet for a comparison. He quickly reached for a pencil, scribbled down the numbers on the screen, and compared them to the ticket he was holding once more. They were meant to be together. Climbing out of his chair, he dashed back towards the bedroom. He gave Louise a hard shake and exclaimed, "We won, Louise, we won." She said, "Leave me alone, Marty. I want to sleep." Marty said, No, you got to wake up. We won the lottery." She said, "Yeah, and I'm the English queen. Now let me go back to sleep before I get angry." Marty said, "Baby, I'm not kidding. We won the lotto. We have made millions of dollars. Examine the ticket." With difficulty, Louise managed to sit up and cast a suspicious glance at her husband mucking around next to the bed. She answered, "Let me see that," and removed the winning ticket from his grasp. She proceeded to their residence and established a connection with the lottery website. She sprang up and started to scream as soon as she saw the winning number and compared it to the ticket she was holding. "Oh my God, Marty, we just won $10 million. After giving each other hugs, they started dancing around the room until they stumbled and fell onto the bed. The happy kisses soon turned into passionate ones between the couple. In his hurry, Marty grabbed at his wife's nightgown and tore it apart. "That was my good nightgown." While Louise let out a cry, Marty simply laughed. "It doesn't matter, baby, I can afford to buy you another." She chuckled and drew him closer to her. Before long, their intense affection for each other mirrored their early years of dating. Even though their relationship didn't last long, they were very happy that they came together. They were exhausted and fell fast asleep. Marty realized it was late when he woke up because of the way the sun was shining through the window. He was startled to roll over and find himself staring at his sleeping wife. He cried out in alarm, "Louise, wake up. You're late for work." She grinned broadly as she opened her eyes. "No, I'm not," she responded. "I called in and gave up my job. I will never again have to deal with those old farts." Though astonished, Marty chose to remain silent. He thought Louise should have taken more time to consider their options before acting hastily and wished she hadn't been so impulsive. Louise wanted to call her family to share the good news with them after breakfast, but Marty told her to hold off. "Before we lose our minds, baby, let's meet with the lottery officials and have them confirm the numbers. Even in the event that we triumph, we must proceed cautiously and carefully consider this." "Oh, Marty, you're just being silly," Louise retorted. "On the website, we both noticed the winning number, and we currently hold the winning ticket. We just need to descend and retrieve the $10 million check. Marty remarked, "That's another thing, Louise. I don't believe the entire amount should be paid at once. We'll still have more money than we've ever had in our lives if we take it as a monthly check, and we'll make sure not to waste it all on foolish things." Although Marty could sense Louise wasn't thrilled with what he was saying, he was appreciative that she didn't argue with him. She asked, "So what are you going to do today, Mr. Millionaire?" After a time, grinning at him, "Here in town, my dad knows an accountant. In an attempt to seek some guidance on what to do with the money, I'm going to try to meet him after lunch. After that, it will probably be time to get to work," Marty replied. "Why in the world are you going back to that place?" Louise questioned with disbelief. "You're rich, you don't ever need to work again." Marty remarked, "I just think we need to take it slow, baby. I don't want to make any snap decisions that we might come to regret. I'll talk to this person and find out what he says. After that, you know what we want to do, don't we?" Louise looked at him obstinately, but said nothing. Marty felt uneasy about that, but decided it was as far as he was likely to get from her and proceeded to make his call. The accountant gave some insightful suggestions. Marty quickly discovered that a lot of his presumptions were incorrect. Marty was also given a copy of a CPA Practice Advisor article regarding lottery winners and the problems they encountered by the accountant. It was grim stuff, and Marty started to feel that this was going to be more complicated than he had imagined. From the accounting firm, Marty continued working. The shift started out smoothly enough, but soon after supper there was a buzz in the background. Subsequently, Marty perceived raised sounds and even believed he could hear someone calling his name. His best friend Terry was walking toward him in the shop, grinning broadly, when he glanced away from the press he was working on. "You lucky guy," exclaimed Terry. "Why didn't you tell me you won the lottery?" Terry was pumping his hand and other staff members were swarming around to give him pats on the back before Marty could come up with anything to say. The inquiries came thick and fast. Would he be leaving his position? What would he purchase initially? Would he accept the one-time payment or the installments each month? Marty looked stunned. "How did you find out?" he questioned, turning to face Terry. "Until we could come up with a solution, we planned to keep it a secret." "Well, forget about that," laughed Terry. "It was on the 6 o'clock news, so everybody in town knows about it now." The factory manager arrived at that precise moment in an attempt to quell the disturbance, but to no avail. At last, he looked across at Marty. "Listen, Marty, how about you take a sick day and head home? If not, we won't be able to finish any work tonight." After apologizing for disturbing him, Mary left for his pickup. The early disclosure of their good fortune infuriated him, and he was eager to find out from Louise what had transpired. However, upon arriving home, he discovered a carnival set up on his front lawn, replete with a news van, reporters, and a throng of friends and family. He was drawn into the center of the chaos as soon as he opened the door to his truck. Louise found herself standing in a pool of light created by the lights the television crew had installed. Marty noticed that she had styled her hair and was dressed in her finest attire as he approached her. Clearly, the news crew had not taken her by surprise. His blood pressure continued to rise. She was trying to be interviewed by a reporter when he took her by the arm and dragged her away. He shouted, "What in the hell is going on, Louise? We agreed that we were going to keep this under wraps until we figured out what we're going to do." Louise reassured Marty, "Don't get upset. I simply had to inform my family, and I assume they did the same. The next thing I knew, Channel 4 was contacting to schedule an interview. Anyhow, we might as well enjoy it because it's too late now." After that, she faced the reporter again and carried on with the interview. All Marty could do was watch with a gloomy expression on his face while Louise talked joyfully to the cameras. When the news crew eventually packed up and left, the agony continued. Many of their friends and neighbors kept hanging around, eager to offer their congratulations to Marty and Louise for their good fortune. The phone rang with well-wishers even after the couple had finally taken cover inside their home, until Marty turned off the ringing and let the answering machine take care of everything. Slumping onto the couch, he glanced at his spouse. Ruefully, "I sure wish you hadn't told anyone yet," he remarked. "Our life has just gotten a heck of a lot more complicated." Louise remained unmoved. "Marty, stop being such a worrier. Nothing is so complicated that $10 million cannot resolve." Marty gave a headshake. "To start with, Louise, the accountant informed me that we would not be receiving $10 million. Before we see a penny, Uncle Sam and the state of Georgia will get their part. Furthermore, they only offer you a percentage of the entire amount if you accept the money all at once. I believe that receiving the money in installments would be far preferable to receiving it all at once. In addition, many winners have run into problems attempting to manage so much money, so we'd receive more that way." Louise gave a frustrated shake of her head. "Marty, you're just being dumb now. I have a lot of things I want to do, and we now have the funds to do them. When we have a lake to draw from, there's no reason to shut off the spigot." Marty merely gave a headshake. He answered, "We'll talk more about it when things calm down a bit," and proceeded to unscrew his beer can. The excitement around the news subsided over the course of the following few days, but Marty and Louise were still inundated with calls and guests. Additionally, high-end real estate brokers and luxury automobile salespeople started approaching them in an attempt to close a major deal with the newest millionaires in the neighborhood. But despite all of the diversions and setbacks, Marty and Louise's argument went on without end in sight. By the time the weekend was over, Marty was eager to return to work because their disagreement over how to manage the money had become a major point of friction. That evening, at about 5 o'clock, Bobby Womack's phone rang. Louise's voice called out, "Hey, Bobby, when are you going to come see me again?" Bobby chuckled. "Now that you're rich, I wasn't sure you'd be interested in seeing me anymore." The pout in her voice was now audible to him. "Awa, Bobby, you know I wouldn't do you that way." "Well, you sure did cut me off cold back in high school, Lulu," he replied. "Yes, but you had to leave school after being found using weed. After that, if my father had caught me talking to you, he would have killed me." Bobby merely chuckled. Louise continued in a wheedling voice, "Anyway, Daddy's not around anymore, and neither is that stick-in-the-mud husband of mine, so why don't you come over and scratch this itch I've got?" "I don't know, Louise, I never slept a millionaire before," he replied. She anxiously remarked, "Well, if you'll get over here, you just might get the chance." After chuckling, he hung up the phone. Louise was reminded of their high school days by their talk while she waited for her lover. She had gone head over heels in love with Bobby Womack, her first love. However, Bobby's locker contained marijuana, and the school principal discovered it, ending their romance. The school board had more than sufficient grounds to expel him, even if the accusations that he was dealing were never validated. In the end, his family moved out of town, and Louise's father had given her strict instructions to never interact with Bobby again, no matter where he was. Naturally, her heart was wounded, but she eventually found herself drawn to the quiet young man because he seemed so perceptive and compassionate. Gradually, their romance took off, and by the time they graduated, there was no doubt about their future together. Louise never wavered in her commitment to Marty, even after he was forced to leave community college due to his father's injury. The two eventually got married when she earned her associate's degree. Then, Louise recounted, one day Marty brought news of an old classmate, Bobby Womack, having returned to town and taken a job at the same company when he arrived home from work. Although Louise remained silent at the moment, the mere mention of his name had her heart skip a beat. She had made it her goal to get back in touch with her ex-boyfriend at the corporate picnic later that year. Up until Bobby suggested that Marty take the second shift, it had been hard for them to see each other. Louise had been getting her itchy spot treated regularly ever since. God, I needed that. 2 hours later, when Louise rolled off of Bobby to lie on the bed next to him, she gasped. "What's the matter, Lulu? Is your hubby not doing his duty?" Bobby made jokes. "No, he's not," she angrily argued, adding that he was acting really shady with the lottery winnings. "He prefers that we take the money over a 26-year period rather than all at once. He is really annoying." Bobby turned to give her a perceptive glance. "It doesn't have to be that way, you know. I have a method for you to keep all of that money to yourself. You wouldn't even need to haggle about how to spend it with Marty." Louise pivoted to gaze expectantly at him. "Are you serious? Let's listen to it," she murmured. When Marty returned to work on Monday evening, things at the facility appeared to have settled down. Many of his pals stopped over to give him pats on the back, and a few said they were surprised he hadn't resigned his job already. Marty tried not to get too worked up about it, but he did observe that every time he entered the area, there seemed to be a background chatter that eventually ended. Being the center of attention was not something he had ever craved, and now that he was, he found it to be unpleasant. The same pattern persisted over the next few days. The only noticeable change Marty saw was that a few of the men he was getting looks from had stopped smiling. A couple of them were even giving him a resentful look. "What's all that about?" Marty pondered. "I never did anything to them." It still unsettled him, though. Up until the dinner break on Friday night, everything appeared to be getting back to normal. While having dinner with Terry, Marty noticed the shift manager approaching him with an unknown person wearing a suit and tie. A manager came up to Marty and stared askance at him. "Sorry to interrupt your dinner, Marty, but this fellow said it was urgent that he speak to you." Stepping forward, the stranger inquired, "Are you Martin Goodpasture?" The man remarked, "You are served," and pushed an envelope into Marty's hands when he realized that. The man turned on his heel and left while Marty looked at him bewildered. "What does that mean, you are served?" Marty asked, turning to face Terry. Terry looked confused and shook his head, but the shift manager turned and motioned to the other men who had gathered together. "You fellows get on back to work now." Then he turned back to the two men at the table while the other employees grudgingly left. "Marty, it appears from those documents that your wife is suing you for a divorce. That's what transpired after my spouse left me." "Divorce?" Marty gave a shocked gasp. "That can't be right." Terry was now holding the envelope that Marty had given to him and examining its contents. He said to his friend, "I'm no lawyer, but I think he's right. It states that this is a divorce petition." Marty cast a bewildered glance at Terry. "There's got to be a mistake." He turned to the shift manager after that. "I must return home and speak with Louise. I have to resolve this immediately." His boss gave him a dejected glance. "All right, Marty. Just don't go overboard." After leaving the facility, Marty drove home with a racing mind. When he noticed Bobby Womack's red pickup sitting in his driveway, they became even more upset. After trailing the large red Dodge Ram, Marty dashed to his home's front door. His key would not fit in the front door lock, much to his dismay. He made multiple futile attempts before starting to beat on the door. "Louise," he cried, "Louise, let me in," but got no answer. His wife's voice could be heard when he answered his cell phone when it suddenly rang. "Marty, please stop banging on doors. What do you hope to accomplish by upsetting the neighbors?" "There's something wrong with the lock, Louise, it won't open." "It won't open," she stated quietly, "because I had all the locks changed after you left for work." "Marty, I know you received the paperwork at work. You are fully aware that we are divorcing, and I don't want you to enter the house any longer." "But it's my house," Marty yelled fiercely. "This is where I reside. I can't be locked out of my own home, you." "Well, I can and I have," she responded swiftly, "and my lawyer says it's up to the court to decide who gets the house." Marty marched back and forth and started cursing. "What's Bobby Womack doing here?" he questioned angrily when he saw the Ram truck once more. "That large truck of his is one I recognize." Louise giggled and continued, "Bobby came over here to give me some comfort in this stressful time. Besides, I needed his help to get the locks changed and to carry all your stuff out." When Marty looked around, he saw the black trash bags by the driveway for the first time. Louise's voice became abruptly serious. "In any case, that's no longer your concern. So please leave before I have to report you to the police for disturbing the peace." Marty believed he heard Bobby giggling in the background, just before she hung up. When Marty tried to call her back, she would not take his call. He walked around to the garage and snapped the cover off his cell phone in a fit of wrath. Although it was secured, Marty managed to sneak inside through the unsecured side entrance. His 9mm pistol was tucked hidden behind some crates on an upper shelf. He took it out and made sure it was still loaded in a hurry. The automatic he tucked into his belt. Several of his neighbors were watching the disturbance through their windows as he stalked to the front door. He paused and I regained my composure. He asked himself, "What am I thinking? This ain't worth going to jail for." Feeling embarrassed at his thoughts, he quickly ran to the trash bags and, after making sure they held only his clothes and personal belongings, put them in the back of his truck. Then he drove off, peeling rubber, irritated and enraged. After just a few blocks of driving, he stopped by the side of the road to gather his thoughts. "Now what should I do? I have nothing but my clothing when I'm locked out of my own home, and I don't even have a place to sleep." At last, he took out his phone and dialed a number. "Is it okay if I stay with you guys tonight, Mom? When I get there, I will clarify." When Marty got there, his parents were seated at the kitchen table. Louise was well liked by both his parents, and Marty quickly found himself obtaining his 3rd degree. When he had completed his recounting of the event, his mother shouted, "What did you do to make her throw you out like that?" "Mom, nothing at all from me. She shut me out the day after we were all cute and cuddly one day. I believe she's gone insane or something because of this stupid lottery stuff." Though it was obvious that his parents were dubious, they nevertheless left him alone so he could return to his previous room and attempt to sleep. Marty spent a difficult weekend trying to process what had happened and work through his feelings, largely by sitting in his old room. He had many memories of riding the old merry-go-round on the playground at grammar school. He would alternate between feeling resentful and hostile towards Louise and feeling isolated from his spouse and their previous blissful union. Clever schemes to repay were followed by denials that anything was going on. He found only solace when he went to the park to perform his calisthenics and jog. He was excited to answer his cell phone when it phoned on Saturday afternoon, thinking it was Louise calling to let him know everything had been an error. Rather, it was Terry extending an invitation for dinner on Sunday. Marty accepted with gratitude, happy to have the opportunity to escape his mother's watchful gaze. On weekends, Marty used to sleep in late, but these days he was waking up early, his head still reeling from the hurt caused by Louise's behavior and his mixed feelings about how to react. Marty made the decision to attend church on Sunday morning when it occurred once more in the hopes of receiving spiritual guidance. The choice turned out to be devastating. All he could think of as he sat in the pew was the family seated nearby. They made him realize how much more profound his own loss was than before, and he found it difficult to focus on what the preacher was saying. That was hardly the worst of it, though. Marty made a hasty getaway after the service in an attempt to avoid talking to friends and acquaintances. However, the gathering congregation outside caused him to slow down, and all of a sudden, he noticed Louise's parents approaching him. The old guy exclaimed loudly and angrily, "You got a lot of nerve coming to a house of God after what you done to my daughter." Marty looked shocked. "I didn't do anything to Louise, Mr. Luttrell," he replied, protesting. "She's the one who kicked me out." "Sure," her dad said, "after she caught you fooling around with some whore while she was off working at the retirement home." Louise said that. Surprised, Marty asked, "But it's not true, I never touched another woman." Around them, a throng had assembled, curious about what would happen. The elderly man ranting, "My Louise said you'd deny it. Now that you have your dreadful lottery winnings, you can go take up with any tramp you choose. However, I would definitely teach you a lesson if I were a few years younger," the elderly guy vowed, slapping Marty in the face. Grabbing her husband's arm, Mrs. Luttrell moved him away from Marty. The audience stared as the two strode away, the man still swearing beneath his breath. Then everyone got into little knots and started whispering to each other about what they had just seen, leaving Marty looking humiliated and enraged. He slunk back to his pickup amid the crowd, bewildered. Marty was limited to discussing the morning's interaction with Terry and his spouse Sally that evening. They were painfully aware of Marty's indignation at being wrongfully accused and Louise's betrayal. Terry and Sally looked at each other, worried, and tried to support and sympathize with Marty as they listened. He eventually became calm enough to eat dinner. Terry then inquired as to Marty's next course of action. "I don't know, Terry, I've never been through anything like this before," Marty said. "Well, I know the first thing you better do Monday," Sally replied. "You really ought to hire a capable attorney. This divorce has a great deal on the line, so you better stay safe." "Hell, I don't even know any lawyers," Marty remarked, feeling absolutely powerless. "My uncle is one," Terry declared. "Even call him." Though it was a scary idea to consider a drawn-out legal struggle, Marty accepted his friend's assessment and took the phone number. "What about the plant?" Terry was curious. "Are you going to go back to work on Monday?" Marty gave a fierce nod. "Oh yeah, that's for sure. I have to do whatever it takes to keep my job, because everything is so uncertain. I have bills to pay, and I can't live off of my parents indefinitely. I'll be there promptly on Monday afternoon." The usual pattern felt somewhat comforting when Marty drove up to the plant on Monday, just before the start of the shift, but it was short-lived. Marty was led to his office by the shift manager, who was waiting for him at the employee entrance. "Marty, I have something to tell you. Bobby Womack quit his job today and came in. He was bragging to everyone who would listen about how he was going to live with your wife and use your lottery winnings for it." That tiny amount of rumor, as you might imagine, spread like wildfire into the underbrush, destroying the plant. "Listen, I completely understand if you would like to take an additional day off." As the shift manager spoke, Marty's head had been lowering and lowering, but at last he looked up, a determined expression on his face. "Thank you, but I suppose I'll get on with my work. No matter what I do, people will still speak, so I might as well deal with it now rather than later." Terry approached him as soon as he set foot on the plant floor and muttered, "Hang in there, man." Though Marty could hear a few snickers and chats going on in the background, the other employees seemed to be trying their best to ignore him. He had trouble focusing on his task, and Terry once prevented him from making a mistake. He had to fight the urge to dash out the door to his truck when his shift was ended. Marty traveled into town the following morning to meet Terry's uncle, his new lawyer. After hearing Marty's version of events, the lawyer looked over the petition that had been served to him. When he was done, he raised an eyebrow at Marty. "This will be rather simple because neither of you has children. Since Georgia is a community property state, all of your assets will be divided equally between the two of you, with each receiving half." Marty cried out, "Wait a minute, I purchased the lottery ticket. Is it not worth something?" "I apologize," the lawyer remarked, "but since you brought the item into the marriage, it is regarded as community property. That'd be accurate if Louise had purchased the ticket rather than you." That didn't make Marty pleased, but then he started to worry about something else. "How about the residence? I've spent a lot of time renovating, expanding, and fixing things up. Why don't I receive credit for it?" The lawyer shook his head. "The court does not want to waste its time attempting to determine who did what and how much it is worth, Marty. According to the law, each partner must be treated equally and divide the assets equally. Therefore, you'll most likely end up selling the property and splitting the earnings unless you two can come to another agreement." Marty said, "That just doesn't seem fair." The lawyer responded, "Well, it might not be fair, but it's the law. But look on the bright side, with what you've won in the lottery, you're going to walk away from this in a lot better financial shape than most people who get divorced." Marty said, "Let me think about it, and I'll get back to you," before making his way to the exit. He continued to reflect on all that had transpired as he drove home. With regret, he thought, "My biggest worry a month ago was getting used to working the second shift. I was just concerned with how to spend a fortune 2 weeks ago. My life has completely failed. I had to move back in with my parents. My wife has kicked me out of the house. She is lying behind my back, and everyone are laughing at me or condemning me. It didn't get better after winning that stupid jackpot. Instead, it got worse." For the next 2 weeks, Marty grew withdrawn. Every evening, he went to work, but he remained silent. He helped his parents out during the day by spending the most of his time performing duties around the house. He spent the remainder of the day working out because he was unable to work on his own house. He continued to reflect on what had transpired during it all, and he gradually started to formulate a strategy to reclaim his life. Marty informed Terry and Sally of his decision and the information he had obtained from the lawyer the next time he visited them. Terry was taken aback. "Are you sure you want to do that, man?" Marty firmly stated, "I've been thinking a lot, Terry, and this is the right thing for me." "Okay, buddy, if that's what you want, I'll back you, but a lot of folks are going to think you're crazy," Terry replied. Marty grinned sardonically and replied, "Maybe they're right." The following Friday, Marty and his lawyer attended a meeting to talk about the property settlement at Louise's lawyer's office. Bobby Womack's presence did not surprise Marty. When they were all seated, Marty interrupted Louise's lawyer as he was about to talk about the equitable distribution of the family's assets. He firmly stated, "That's not the way I want to do it. Prior to him continuing, his lawyer intervened. I'd like to go on record that I have advised my client that what he is about to propose is not in his best interest, but he has decided to disregard my advice. The lawyer leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms to show how annoyed he was. Marty leaned forward and took up a pre-prepared document. Lillian, here's the thing. I'll give you the lottery ticket, and you're free to keep the entire sum of money. In return, I just ask that you acknowledge your wrongdoings and return my residence. Everything is explained in this document. A copy slid across the table by him. Bobby took Louise by the arm and started whispering forcefully to her when she started to object. Marty's idea obviously caught her attorney off guard. Following some uncertainty, he requested a private meeting with his client for a few minutes, and the three of them departed the room. Uncle Terry leaned forward to speak with Marty. I still hope you'll think twice. You don't have to forfeit all of your winnings. Hell, you could buy Louise out of her share of the house and have plenty of cash left over. Marty obstinately shook his head. I've thought a lot about this, and this is what I want to do. Louise was voicing her objections loudly in the other conference room. I will not sign anything of that nature. My father would tan my hide if I did, considering what I told him about Marty. Bobby took her arm before her lawyer could say anything further. Who cares, Lulu? Bobby manipulated. What your father or anybody else thinks is irrelevant. Either way, you and I are leaving this place. Besides, eventually everyone will know what transpired. If you agree, it's crucial that we receive the entire amount, not just half of it, to spend any way we like. Only somewhat was Louise placated. So, how is the house doing? He's attempting to wriggle out of giving me half the house, even though you promised me that. Bobby interrupted abruptly. Baby, are you blind? This is superior even to that. For $5 million, Marty is essentially purchasing your portion of the house. For $10 million, you may purchase many homes. The lawyer cleared his throat. Technically, it isn't really $10 million. Yeah, Bobby interrupted. We know Uncle Sam has to get his share. The thing is, though, that if Marty is foolish enough to give it up, you would be crazy not to accept the enormous sum of money. I have to agree, the lawyer said. This is a much better result than anything you would likely get in court. Compared to receiving the remaining lottery money, a forced sale of your house in its current unfinished state would yield almost nothing. Regarding the disclosure of extramarital affairs, that is also unimportant legally. Since this is a no-fault state, the court in this case doesn't care who did what with whom. Louise's expression lightened. Well, if it don't mean anything and we get the whole $10 million out of the deal, then I guess my only other question is where do I sign? After entering the main meeting room once more, Marty's lawyer's prepared agreement was ostentatiously signed by Louise. Marty said, okay, now when can I have my house back? After receiving his copy back, Bobby nodded as Louise turned to face him. On Monday, we're going to the lottery headquarters to pick up the winnings. You are free to return the key that evening as we will be leaving the following day. Bobby bent down to give Louise a high five as they rose to exit the room. He gloated, we hit the jackpot, Lulu. Then he turned to face Marty again and deliberately grabbed Louise's behind. Marty started hunting for his mother as soon as he returned to his parents' house. He approached his parents, who were sitting in front of the television, and gave her a copy of the contract Louise had just signed. You're curious as to why Louise broke up with me. Well, go through this, he added, gesturing to the relevant part. In layman's terms, it states that she left me because she was seeing Bobby behind my back. I did nothing to offer her an excuse to go, it was all her idea. His mother looked up at her son sheepishly, having finished her book. I'm sorry I doubted you, son. Who would have thought that Louise would act like such a tramp? Have you lost your marbles, Marty? This says that you gave Louise the whole $10 million. Why in hell would you do that? His father, who had been reading the agreement, suddenly yelled. Dad, you always told me that nothing was more important than my good name. Well, I've got my good name back now. The old man gave him a strange look. That's a hell of a price to pay, son. Marty insisted, it's worth it, Dad, every penny of it. Marty dressed in his nicest church attire and got up early on Sunday, but he didn't go inside until right before the service began. A murmur went through the assembly when he entered the chapel and sat in the front pew, but Marty chose to ignore it. When the service was over, Marty got up to speak to the assembly. He cleared his throat nervously as he stood in front of them and began. I understand that many of you have a negative opinion of me at the moment, but I would like to read you something. This is a statement that Louise, my soon-to-be ex-wife, made this past Friday in front of witnesses. I have a copy of it on the bulletin board by the door if you would like to see it. I will read it to you now. I, Louise Luttrell Goodpasture, do hereby acknowledge and declare that I am divorcing Martin Goodpasture in order to pursue a relationship with Bobby Womack. During our marriage, I had a secret relationship with Bobby without my husband's knowledge or consent. Marty had nothing to do with our breakup. I hereby certify that this is an accurate declaration that I have given voluntarily and without coercion. Luttrell Louise Goodpasture. Bobby moved down the middle aisle until he reached the row where the Luttrell family was seated as the assembly started to murmur enthusiastically. Mr. Luttrell, you recently leveled some pretty severe charges against me. Maybe you'll believe your own daughter, even though you didn't believe me, he said, pressing another copy of Louise's declaration into her father's grasp. When he handed it to his wife, who had started crying, the elderly man's face became pale as he studied the signature. "That cursed Bobby Womack. I swear," he said. Marty turned and walked out of the building, his head held high, saying quietly, "It looks like she fooled all of us, Mr. Luttrell." After taking a sympathetic glance at the two of them, the following night brought a new diversion. The break room TV was tuned to the local station, and the big news of the day was a feature on the local lottery winner. There was some hooting and hollering in the break room when a jubilant Louise collected a giant check from the Georgia State Lottery and promptly embraced Bobby Womack, whom the newscaster referred to as her fiancé. On Monday, the evening shift was largely normal, with the exception that Marty's appearance in church was a hot topic of conversation. The only thing that helped Marty get through the evening was knowing that he would be able to move back into his own home after work. He had his clothes and personal belongings all packed in his truck, and after the shift ended he headed straight to the house. Terry tried his best to keep the inquisitive and annoying away from his friend, but Marty still had to listen to more razzing about losing both the lottery money and his wife to another man. When he opened the door and turned on the lights, he discovered that Louise had left the keys to the new locks in the mailbox, just as she had promised. Food had been left out on the counter, dirty plates filled the sink, and other moving-related debris was all over the place. "I bet that woman didn't clean the house once since the time I moved out," he thought bitterly. The bedroom was even worse. Not only was the bed unmade, but the sheets were all soiled and crusty. Marty decided to toss out the mattress and box springs along with the linens, and after brushing off all the crumbs, he ended up sleeping on the couch that night. On Wednesday, after a restless night, Marty got up early and started cleaning the place, starting with the kitchen. After he was satisfied with the way the sink and dishes looked, he made a pot of coffee and went outside to get the newspaper, where he was shocked to see a picture of himself in an article titled "The World's Unluckiest Lottery Winner," which described how Marty had won the $10 million jackpot and then lost it to his soon-to-be ex-wife. The writer seemed to find the situation amusing, but Marty did not. The phone call Marty received from his sister an hour later definitely did the trick, if the newspaper item hadn't already made him feel sick to his stomach enough. "Is the report in the paper true?" With anger, she demanded. His sister angrily yelled at him once he finally admitted that it was essentially true. "Marty, can't you do anything right? We intended to take out a loan from you to cover the down payment on a home. You really ruined our plans." She hung up on him after that. He tried to play it down, thinking, "I guess I shouldn't count on a Christmas card from her this year." But the truth was that he felt bad for his big sister, for having to help her and her husband through a difficult financial time during the recession. He would have been happy to lend her some money if he could have. In the months that followed, Marty's humiliation at being the subject of constant gossip and his loneliness after being married for so long drove him into a monastic lifestyle. Aside from the odd visit to see his parents or Terry and Sally, he spent most of his free time working on the house he had so expensively regained, remodeling and renovating the existing building before embarking on an ambitious expansion. A bright spot for Marty was the welcome realization that his pre-lottery financial woes vanished quickly. His frugal way of living and the fact that he was no longer responsible for Louise's frivolities balanced his spending and gave him the extra cash he needed for his makeover. Marty's friends and family would occasionally try to set him up with a woman who was available, but even though he didn't say no, none of the dates ended in a relationship. Eventually, it was clear that Marty wasn't ready to commit to another woman, so his friends decided to leave him alone until he was. Terry gave him a call one Saturday, over a year later, saying, "Hey, can you help me out? I could need some assistance moving my younger sister's belongings into her new apartment as she is relocating across town." When Marty drove to Terry's house to meet his friend, Terry filled him in on the circumstances, saying that Nancy was attempting to flee an abusive situation when they were riding to his sister's new apartment. "She called me after reporting her husband John to the police after he had hit her the previous time. Although she has begun the divorce process, she is attempting to avoid that scoundrel as much as possible because she is terrified of him. Are you sure this is the right address? I hate a man who will hit a woman," Marty said, turning to face Terry as he went. "Living here is hardly the ideal situation for a single woman." Terry admitted, "I know, but that's all she can afford at the moment. We don't have enough room, but I would take her in at our house. Furthermore, it's not only her, she also has a daughter who is 4 years old." At that moment, they arrived at the dilapidated apartment building and saw the rental van parked in front. Marty parked his truck, and Terry got out to hug his sister and niece. Nancy shook his hand when Terry introduced him, but Marty noticed that she didn't look directly at him. He also noticed that she still had the remnants of her black eye, which made him angry. "I'm Lily," the little girl answered, looking up at him, not quite as shy as her mother. "Are you a kind man?" Marty grinned. "I guess I'm a pretty nice man," he remarked. She put out her hand and replied, "Okay, then you can be my friend." After shaking her hand and laughing, Marty said, "Okay, Lily, let's you and me be friends." He then proceeded to assist Terry with unloading the truck. Following their completion, Nancy thanked the two of them and offered them a soft drink. "Don't let Lily bother you," she whispered to Marty. "She's just kind of lonely." Marty said, "Oh, she's no bother at all. I like kids anyway." Nancy gave a grateful smile. Marty would see the two of them whenever Terry and Sally invited him over for dinner after that. He found out that Sally would watch Lily with her girls while Nancy went to work at the Walmart in town. Marty assumed that Terry and Sally were also providing financial support for Nancy, but Terry never mentioned it. One Saturday a month later, Terry's mobile phone went off when he was helping Marty with some plumbing. The look on his face warned Marty that something terrible had happened. "We'll be right there," Terry said, snapping the phone shut. "That was Nancy," shouted Terry. She thought she saw John peering through their apartment window. Marty urged, "Come on, my truck is right out front." The two men drove quickly to Nancy's apartment building, where Marty, with Terry at his heels, grabbed a pipe wrench from the tool chest and hurried toward Nancy's unit. When they saw the tall man kicking frantically at the door, Marty exclaimed, "Hey, you, get away from there." The man swiftly ducked around the side of the building and vanished when he noticed Terry and Marty racing towards him. "Nancy, it's me, Marty." Marty knocked on Nancy's door as Terry went to check on him. "He is now left. Let yourself in." Nancy hesitated for a minute before finally cracking the door open and peeking out to see whether Marty was there. "Are you okay?" "I'm pretty shook up, but I'm not hurt," she sobbed in response to Marty's frantic question. "Hey, where's Lily?" Nancy answered, "I sent her back to the bedroom," and Marty hurried down the hall to see how the little girl was doing. At first, he couldn't find the child anywhere, but just as he was about to lose hope, he noticed a sock-clad foot protruding from under the bed. Getting down on his hands and knees, he peered underneath the bed. "Hello, Lily. This is Marty. You are now free to leave." The young girl sprang into Marty's arms as soon as she emerged from under the bed, and he brought her back out to the front of the flat, where Terry was consoling Nancy. "Why was our father shouting at us?" Lily was curious as to why he had injured her mother. Terry nodded, confirming Marty's statement. "I don't know, Lily, but he's gone now, and we won't let him hurt you or Mommy anymore." Nancy gave Terry a grateful grin and they all four climbed into Marty's truck's cab after he locked the apartment. "That's right," Terry added, "and we're all going back to my house for tonight." As they drove back, Terry contacted his wife, Sally, who was waiting for them at the door, greeted Nancy and then leaned down to hug Lily, saying, "I know, let's have a sleepover tonight." Lily smiled at the suggestion and went off to play with Sally's kids. "That settles it. You are not going back to that apartment again," Terry declared firmly to his sister as the four adults took their seats in the living room. "There's a risk John will return now that he is aware of your residence. But there's just no room for the two of us in your house, so I can't impose on you like that," Nancy said. "John wouldn't dare return after today, therefore I'll be fine at the flat. Simply put, you're not safe there." Terry retorted, "Sis, we'll figure something out." Marty listened to the three of them dispute for a while before he finally stated, "Maybe there's another option," which caused the others to turn to face him. "I've got a big old house that's empty except for me." Then, realizing what he had just said, he reddened. "You could stay with me, if you want. I'm trying to say that you could remain in the newly added bedroom. We could store your belongings there as it has a private bathroom and is empty of furniture. In addition, I am an evening worker, so you wouldn't see me very often," he said, trailing off as he considered how Nancy could interpret his offer. He continued, embarrassed, "Maybe it's not such a good idea after all," but Terry stopped him. "No, it's a great idea if you're willing, Marty," Terry said, turning to face his sister. "Listen, Sally and I will both vouch for Marty, and he's been my best friend for a long time," Terry said. "You'd be safe over there, because John wouldn't know where to look for you. At the very least, it would buy us some time to come up with a long-term solution." Nancy was hesitant to bother Marty and Terry, but they persuaded her. Terry and Marty then left in Marty's truck to start moving Nancy's few belongings to Marty's house. When they were finished, Sally took Nancy and Lily to see the property. Nancy was appreciative, but Lily wasn't impressed. "Where's your swing set?" Gesturing out the rear window, she asked. Marty was beaming. "I don't have one of those, Lily, but there's a park near here and your mommy can take you to play there." The little girl answered, "Well, I guess that's okay," and the issue was resolved. Since Nancy worked during the day and Marty left for work before she got home, the first few days of the new arrangement were a little awkward as both of them tried to avoid intruding on each other as much as possible. However, on the weekends, things were different. When Marty awoke on Saturday morning and smelled the aroma of cooking emanating from the kitchen, he discovered that Nancy and Lily had made a hearty meal consisting of bacon and eggs. "This is excellent." With gratitude, Marty said to Nancy, "You didn't have to go to all that trouble," while sipping his coffee. "You've been so nice to Lily and me, it's the least I could do," Nancy said with a grin. "You snore," Lily murmured, glancing at him over her plate as her mother let out a gasp. Marty simply laughed and said, "Lily, you're right. That's what—" He halted and his face became serious, but he smiled immediately again and continued, "I've been told that before." Lily wandered outside to see Marty perform his calisthenics after breakfast. "What are you doing?" she inquired inquiringly. "I'm doing my exercises," Marty said. Lily said, "Oh, what are exercises?" Marty responded, "They're kind of a game that grown-ups play. Do you want to try some?" He had the young girl stand with her hands on her waist and nod. He showed her what to do, saying, "Now, reach up high, then touch your shoulders. Next, you bend over and touch your toes." "It's not very enjoyable," she said angrily. Marty thought of a recollection from her early years. Then Marty started singing, head and shoulders, knees and toes, while carrying out the routine. "That's because I didn't tell you the other part, you have to sing along." Lily quickly caught on to the straightforward melody and started to mimic his movements. Nancy emerged onto the rear veranda to observe. She yelled, "Now Lily, stop bothering Mr. Goodpasture." It was time for Marty to go for his morning run, but not before he showed Lily a few warm-up exercises. "It's no bother," he immediately interrupted, "we're just playing a game." He said to the young child, "If you want, Lily, we can do that again tomorrow," and he walked away. The young child wanted to do Marty's workouts outside with him whenever he went outside after that. She was not able to complete all the exercises or hold on to them as long as Marty could, but she still enjoyed playing head and shoulders with him. Nancy initially only kept an eye on the two of them to make sure Lily wasn't causing any trouble, but after some time she started participating in the exercises as well. She didn't have much endurance at first, but she quickly started to keep up without any trouble. Marty couldn't help but notice how attractive she looked in her t-shirt and shorts while she performed the routines. Following the warm-up exercises, Nancy and Lily would head inside to prepare breakfast while Marty went for his daily run. There will be a big lunch ready for him when he returned. Marty considered a homemade breakfast to be a true delight after surviving for so long on packaged cereal. Marty kept up the house renovations during the weekdays while Lily stayed with Sally and her kids and Nancy worked at the business. He made a special effort to make the restroom and bedroom that Nancy and Lily used more comfortable for each other. After living alone for a while, he discovered that, despite the unusual living situation, he enjoyed having housemates. When he unlocked the cupboard to fix a leak beneath the sink in the bathroom the mother and daughter used, he discovered the laundry basket with their soiled clothes. A pair of Nancy's underwear lay atop the heap, and despite their simple white and functional design, Marty couldn't help but pick them up and examine them. He shook his head and said, "Damn, it's been a long time." He then guiltily put them back in the clothes basket and continued working on the repairs, attempting to block out the memory of the woman who slept so close to him every night. Nothing special happened at work that evening, but while Marty was tidying up before leaving for home, he heard two other men in the restroom discuss a name he hadn't heard in a long time. "You'll never guess who my brother saw last weekend, Bobby Womack." "My brother was in Atlanta," said the individual, and he ran into Bobby and Louise in a nightclub there. Bobby told him that they'd just gotten back from a week in Atlantic City. They were spending money like it was water, and later they took him back to their mansion in the richest section of town. "My brother said they're living like a king and queen." All the hurt and rage Marty had believed had long since subsided returned as his ex-wife and the man who had stolen her from him were brought up. He drove home, recalling everything that had happened since Louise had betrayed him and Marty had been humiliated as a result. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep by the time he arrived, so he sat down in the chair and switched on the television quietly in the hopes of finding anything to occupy his mind. A short while later, he heard something behind him, and as he turned to look, he saw Lily just around the bend. He smiled and said, "What are you doing up at this hour, young lady?" The little girl entered the room fully. "I woke up and I can't go back to sleep. Will you read me a story?" She looked at him so beseechingly that Marty thought he should be tough with her and tell her to go back to bed, but he couldn't resist her. "Okay," he replied, "just one." She smiled and hurried off to fetch a book in her room. When Marty returned with a book tucked under her arm, she had already turned off the television. Immediately, she got onto his lap. She pleaded, "Uncle Marty, read this one." Grinning at that, Marty adjusted the recliner and settled down to read aloud from a Dr. Seuss book he recalled from his own youth. The young girl soon closed her eyes, but Marty continued to read in a low, sing-song manner because he wasn't sure if she had fallen asleep or not. He was awakened by the aroma of breakfast cooking and discovered that Lily was asleep on his chest under a blanket when he was still in the recliner. After easing Lily into the chair by rolling to one side and tucking the blanket around her, he entered the kitchen. Nancy gave him a warm smile while pointing out that it looks like your audience wore you out last night. Marty reddened. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to keep her up, but she said she couldn't sleep and wanted me to read to her." And Nancy dismissed his apology with a wave. "You were sweet to read to her. I just hope she didn't bother you." Marty hurriedly said, "Oh, no, she wasn't at all bothersome. In fact, I kind of enjoyed it." Grinning once more, Nancy returned to her scrambling of eggs. They all gathered for a cookout at Terry and Sally's place a week later. Marty was assisting Sally in setting up the picnic table while Nancy and the kids played in the backyard. They turned to observe the youngsters for a minute, then Sally turned to Marty when she heard one of them chuckle. She inquired nonchalantly, "So how is everything going with Nancy and Lily?" Marty said, "Oh, everything's fine. They're really no trouble at all." Sally gave him a sharp look. "What do you think about Nancy?" "She's fantastic," Marty answered. "She's a great mom and a real good cook." Sally pushed him. "Have you ever thought about asking her out?" Surprisingly, Marty asked, "You mean like out on a date?" "I dunno, Sally, that might be awkward, what with them living in my house and everything," he replied. Besides, it might make Nancy uncomfortable if I asked. She might not want to. She probably doesn't think of me that way. Sally merely gave him a smile. She remarked, "You might be surprised, Marty. Anyway, just think about it," and then she invited the others to join her for dinner. Marty considered what Sally had advised for a few days in his head. It was obvious that he was drawn to Nancy. Marty found it difficult to focus on his routine when she would come out to work out with him in the backyard. Her body language in her t-shirt and shorts was really distracting. She was slender and fit. She also had a very different attitude from Louise. She was friendly and laid back. However, Marty had shunned the other gender ever since his ex-wife departed, initially because he didn't want to put himself through any more heartbreak and then because he didn't see any attractive options. Now, while Nancy was undeniably attracted to him, he was concerned about the potential fallout from any attempt to alter their relationship. He'd become accustomed to having Nancy feel at ease, and he would hate to lose up that family and the house. He realized he would miss Lily too if she felt she had to move away. All in all, Marty hesitated to disturb the existing quo, even if it was a significant move. When he went home from work that evening, he was still arguing over the matter, but as soon as he saw an unfamiliar car parked in front of his house, he forgot all about his problems. The automobile had come up over the curb at an angle, as if the driver had been in a hurry, and his uneasiness turned to panic. Then he noticed that light was streaming out of his front door into the yard, which was wide open. "John's found her," he exclaimed, and the prospect of what might be inside made his heart race. He dashed towards his garage after hastily pulling his truck onto the roadway. When he took his revolver out of its hiding spot, there was a roaring sound in his ears. Chambering around in the automatic, he made his way to the front of the house. He heard screaming coming from inside the front door, so he cautiously peered around the frame. In Marty's living room stood a man who resembled the intruder Nancy had seen at her apartment months before. He was shaking Nancy and held her by the shoulders. Fear was holding Marty's breath, and she was positive it was her ex-husband, John. Everything appeared to move at a leisurely pace. He pulled the door open and slipped inside without either of them noticing him, holding the revolver tightly. He held out his revolver slowly and yelled, "Hold it right there, John." The man, still holding Nancy, whirled around in shock. He spotted Marty and wrapped his arm over the frightened woman's waist, holding her close to him. Simultaneously, he reached into his jeans waist to retrieve a handgun and leveled it at Nancy's head. "Avoid getting any closer." For a considerable amount of time, the three of them stood motionless until Lily emerged from the rear hallway and exclaimed, "Mommy." "Stay still, Lily," he said, and Marty could see that the man was growing more and more irritated by the moment. The little girl started to weep and tried to get to her mother, but Marty grabbed her arm and pulled her back before she could get close to them. Marty felt Lily fling off his grasp as he desperately searched for a way to end the standoff, but then a recollection flashed through his mind, and he calmly replied, "Lily, since we're all awake, how about we do some exercises? Is it acceptable?" Lily gave him a doubtful glance before nodding. Marty raised his head to meet Nancy's gaze and said, "Mommy can do the exercises too. It will be enjoyable." John was staring at Marty, completely bewildered, but all Marty could do was look at Nancy, beseech her with his eyes for explanation, thinking he saw something in her gaze, and hoping he was right. He turned back to Lily and said, "Okay, Lily, let's start playing head and shoulders. Just like we always do, let's go very slowly, shall we?" "Okay, Lily, okay, Mommy, here we go," Marty remarked, receiving a nod from the young child. "Both the head and shoulders," he said, drawing it out. Obediently, the little girl put her hands on her head and then her shoulders. Marty saw what he hoped was comprehension in Nancy's eyes. "Knees and toes," Marty went on, and just as she was about to bend over at the waist to touch the ground, Marty shot her assailant, hitting him in the upper chest. Marty's second fire went high and to the left, and as the man began to raise his gun, Marty's third shot got him in the forehead, sending him backwards and onto the floor. The man grumbled and staggered backwards, letting Nancy drop to the floor. The sound startled both Lily and Nancy. When Marty kicked the gun out of the hand of the crumpled, lifeless body, Nancy scurried over to hold Lily firmly while he ran over to his cell phone and contacted cops. After he had done speaking with the police dispatcher, he called Terry and said, "Get over here quick, buddy. John has visited us," he stated. Following his phone call, he gingerly placed his handgun on the mantel above the fireplace before approaching Nancy and Lily as they lay on the floor, their arms entwined. Abruptly, all the adrenaline seemed to escape him like air from a burst balloon, and he collapsed to the ground, clutching the two of them. "I thought I'd lost you," he sobbed repeatedly. When they came through the door, that's how the police discovered them. The questioning from the cops didn't take long, but throughout, Marty held on to Nancy and Lily, refusing to let them go. Marty laughed as he thought, even though it won't stay that way for long, as he prepared the house for a set afternoon BBQ 2 years later. Terry, Sally, and their children had been invited. He was shocked when the doorbell rang because the gathering wasn't supposed to start for at least an hour. When he opened the door, he saw a woman with platinum blonde hair that turned dark at the roots. She was wearing rather skimpy clothing and high-heeled shoes that looked expensive but well-worn. She was staring at him with a faint smile, and it took him a minute to identify her. "Hello, Louise," he said in a flat voice. How do I appear? She questioned mischievously, pirouetted slowly to reveal her figure to him. What do you want, Louise? Marty asked as he stepped outside onto the porch and closed the door behind him. He asked sharply, is that any way to greet me after all these years? She mockingly shook her head. I assumed you would be thrilled to see me. He answered, I thought you were in Atlanta. Yes, but that was a long time ago. Now that I'm back in the city, I naturally wanted to come look you up, she said, giving him a close look. Have you lost weight? She smiled flirtatiously at him and said, of course you always were a good-looking man. You look like you're really in shape. Marty responded, I've been working on the house to get it finished up, but her compliment completely missed him. Wow, you've done so much with the place, it looks great, she said, surveying the area as though she was seeing the house for the first time. Have you expanded on it? That section over there is not what I remember. Listen, Louise, I'm really running out of time to talk. I have to finish getting dressed because people are coming over soon. Her voice took on a hint of nervousness. Yes, Marty, absolutely. However, the reason is that I was wondering whether we may possibly resume our relationship now that I'm back in the city. Marty was obviously taken aback, even if he tried not to show it. What about Bobby Womack? I'm amazed, he inquired. A frown crossed Louise's face. That bastard. He stole a bunch of money from me and made off with it, she angrily remarked, shaking her head in disdain. It took the police 6 months to find him in Las Vegas, and by then the money he had taken was completely gone. But don't worry about him, he is currently incarcerated at Macon State Prison and has a really cozy room. Marty was curious, so what happened to the rest of the $10 million? Hey, you ought to be aware of better than that, of all people. It was closer to $5 million after the deduction for paying it all in cash, the Fed's cut, and the state's cut, she replied sourly. Marty insisted, maybe so, Louise, but $5 million is nothing to sneeze at. Oh, it was pretty sweet for a while, Louise said with a small smile as her eyes took on a distant aspect. Bobby and I purchased a mansion in Atlanta, complete with opulent automobiles, exquisite clothing, and all the extravagance one could hope for. Marty, you ought to have seen the events we had. We had Dom Perignon pouring like water and live bands performing. We used to travel to Vegas frequently. We went to all the biggest performances and everything, and they treated us like Arab oil sheikhs. We once hired a jet and traveled there with 20 of our pals. The problem is, most of the times we went gambling, we lost, she said, her smile vanishing from her face. We had friends who weren't actually our friends, they were just swindlers. Not that any of them ever paid back the money, but they were always willing to lend it to others. They were content enough to join us for parties, but as things became tight, they dispersed like cockroaches as the lights went on. Anyway, somewhere along the line, Bobby found this great investment that was going to make us a fortune, she said, shaking her head as if to erase an unpleasant recollection. All right, another stroke of luck. However, it proved to be a hoax, and the money vanished in the same way as our supposed pals. Bobby parted ways with the remaining portion of our financial account at that point. The bank then took back the house and our vehicles, and now here I am. So all $5 million of the money is gone? Marty inquired. With regret, she nodded. And now that you're back here, seeking assistance, he continued. She gave him a hopeful glance before nodding once again. Fortunately for you, the retirement community where you previously worked is hiring, he remarked. You may probably go back to your previous employment. He saw the fury wash over her face, but she forced herself to calm down by taking a big breath. Come on, Marty, you know that's not what I meant, she said. In addition, I formerly had a really excellent relationship with you. I know I could make it up to you if you would just give me a chance. Nancy came out of the door and stood next to Marty before Marty could reply. She inquired, is everything okay, honey? He wrapped his arm around her, and Louise took a sharp gasp at the sight of Nancy's growing baby bulge. He followed Nancy back inside, shutting the door behind him, saying, It was nice of you to pay us a visit, Louise, but my wife and I got company coming over, and we have to get ready. Nancy said, Who was that, honey? With a contemptuous tone, he said, Nobody important. Just somebody that I used to know. Later that day, Sally and Nancy watched after their kids as they played on the outdoor swing set while Marty and Terry grilled steaks. Terry gave his friend a condescending glance. I have to admit it, you were right about Louise and Bobby. I never would have believed that somebody could blow $5 million, but they did it. How did you know? Marty gave a contemplative nod. Folks who are foolish and untrustworthy when they're poor don't get any better when they're rich. I couldn't see it ending any other way. The only thing that surprised me was it took them that long to blow it all. He jerked up to see Lily playing with her mother after hearing a delighted shout from her just now. Nancy turned to wave to the two men and smiled at Marty, who was observing them. She waved at Marty, who smiled back. His friend pivoted to face him. You're very fortunate, Terry remarked. Marty said, Yeah, I think I won the lottery. My comment, did you like this long video? I rarely do a long video like this cause it takes a little bit more time. Did you like any of the characters, and what would you do if you win the lottery? Comment down below, sub and bell, and I will see you in the next one.